So welcome to week 5 of From Inner Circle. Apologies for the technical issue there. You know, that's how people must feel when they're on live television.
Indeed. Well, I guess they get used to that with time. But welcome to week 5. And today we're going to talk about one of the most ubiquitous man-made materials on this planet, plastics. And we have amazing guests to tell you all about everything that we do in relation to plastics. And my name is Ilma. I'm your co-host. If this is the first time that you're joining the series, welcome. We're very happy you're with us. And I have Seb, who is co-hosting this with me as usual.
Welcome, guys. Great to do this. My favorite part of these shows is the admin. And so I'm going to very quickly run through a couple of admin points. So just a very quick reminder, of course, about the LinkedIn and Slack channels. The links are here. They'll be shared in the slides afterwards, and they'll be shared on the slides at the end. This is a week where we have double webinars. So you can see the dates for the cities and food webinars that are not our normal time slot. And it also very helpfully on this slide tells you exactly how you receive the information about when they're live. All of the recordings will be published on the Slack channel and LinkedIn group. So if you can't attend both, don't worry. If you want to attend both, great. Or feel free to just choose the ones that you're most interested in. And then finally, I guess just a reminder of some rules about Zoom. Chat window is for chat. That's simple to remember. Q&A is for Q&A. So only questions that go into the Q&A will we be able to collect to answer either in the forum or to put to our guests. So please use that function.
Yes, and when you ask your questions in the Q&A, please make sure that you stick to the contents of this webinar because we won't have any capacity to answer any other questions. And we'll try to bring as many questions as possible into the live air and get our guests answer that. And if this is the first time you're joining, just so that you know, we do have a thing called homework, something to help you learn through in between the sessions. And we did have some really fascinating actually question as a homework last week about what perceptions have shifted on circular economy since you joined the series. So we're not going to really pick on that today, but if you have more to share or if you haven't shared yet, please head to week 4 Slack channel and post your comments there, and we'll pick it up, I think, in a couple of weeks once we finish with the double webinar series.
And we will be picking it up in the Slack, so make sure you've joined there.
Yes, and now I think the time to introduce our guest speakers. So we have 3 of them today, actually, joining from the plastics team, Garance, Juliette, and Leela. So welcome. Can we see them? Yes. So perhaps just to start, I would like to ask each of you a question. Maybe there is a story in terms of what attracted you to this topic, plastics and circular economy. Garance, we don't see you on camera.
Yes.
So, yes.
Hi everyone, I'm here, but I cannot really start my video for now, so I can just introduce myself like this. I'm really happy to be here. I guess, yeah, talking about like on my side, I had a kind of plastics realization moment a while ago. I used to live in Venice in Italy during a whole year. And I guess when you think about the city, whether you have been there or not, it's quite a magical place, right? Well, oh yeah, I can turn on my video now. Yeah, can you see me?
All the better for seeing you, Garance.
Yes.
Cool. So when I was in Venice, I had the opportunity to take part into regular plastic cleanups of the lagoon once a month. And the first time, you know, I was really happy to dedicate my Saturday afternoon to collecting very old PET bottles in the canals. And I remember that the first day when we went back there, we collected 2 tons of plastic waste in the lagoon. But then I came back every month, and every month I realized that the mountain didn't get any smaller, but actually got bigger. So yeah, I think I realized that the problem was not only about collection, because given the mountains of waste, collection will just never be enough. And I started to think differently about the way we actually design and use our everyday products. And yeah, I thought that changing the system, the plastic system, was kind of a nice challenge to accept. And this is basically why I'm working at the foundation in the new plastics economy team. I'm really looking forward to tell you more about that.
Great.
I love the description of the changing the plastic system as a nice challenge to
I
accept.
know, that's exactly what I wanted to say.
An easy one, right?
That's good.
Juliet, what about you?
Hi everyone. I'm very excited to be here with all of you and with the amazing learning and impact team, of course. So as for me, it's actually a bit similar to Garen's. So I was working in Cambodia in an environmental organization. And of course, as you can all imagine, plastic is just everywhere. It's so sad and crazy. It's on the beach, in the water, on the ground. And I was going quite often to remote places in floating villages, which are beautiful places surrounded by water. So people live in their house there, but of course they have no access to any type of waste collection system. And they use a lot of plastic, of course, a lot of plastic bags, a lot of, like this type of sachet, flexible packaging that are, of course, like non-recyclable at all. And it was pretty sad because like 20 years back, at least, like 30 years, few decades at least, they used to throw away their waste around, but there was no really impact because it was all biodegradable. Unless now it's plastic and they don't know much because it just happens so quickly. And there you could really see a system failure where like the packaging is not recyclable, there is no education, there is no infrastructure. So there is a clear need for every type of stakeholders actually to take actions. And circular economy for me brings really a nice framework to work on and has a system mindset that we all need. So here I am.
Great, welcome, Juliet. And some of the things you mentioned, lack of infrastructure, education as one of the barriers, we'll definitely pick up on that later on. And last but not the least, Juliet. Juliet just spoke. Leela.
Yeah, hi. And so my story is probably almost a slower burn rather than a single moment of realization, I guess. For me, it all starts, the story really starts growing up in Margaret River, a small town in Western Australia, and having a mum who was an artist and grew all her own vegetables. And, we went bushwalking, searching for orchids. And then combined with that, a dad who was really technical and would sit down and, help him build circuit boards for the first electric car that he was going to build. And so from very young, I became really interested in how we used, science and over time that morphed into understanding how we use design to design the world in a way that we could still benefit from all, everything that a modern lifestyle brings us and all the benefits that brings, but in a way that still respected and restored the environment rather than degrading it in the way that we do currently. So that led me to study chemistry, focused on green chemistry, and actually looking at how you can make chemical processes, so improve chemical processes and reduce the waste through that. And I finished studying that, did some research in that, and absolutely loved chemistry, but felt like it was still a bit too far down the research line, that it was not at the face of impact yet. So from there, decided that I wanted to get into materials engineering and actually focus on developing materials rather than molecules. And that led me to a PhD looking at polymers and biodegradable polymers. That I started to get quite disillusioned when I was looking at the research and realized that actually just trying to make a biodegradable material definitely wasn't going to solve, and that it wasn't a material problem, it was a systems problem. And I was quite disillusioned because it just felt really big, and how was I going to then take the step to make impact on that? And it was in the first year of my PhD that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation New Plastics Economy first report was published. And that just opened my mind up and gave me this really positive of how it was a systems problem, but there was a systems solution to it. And that led me to the foundation and come here and really looking forward to, talking through then that systems approach and the innovation angle through that.
So we're going to hear a bit about what all of you guys do during the course of this session. But I think where I'd like to start, and actually I was thinking this morning, actually, if you told me 10 years ago, or maybe certainly 15 years ago I was at school, but 10 years ago that everyone would have a really strong opinion about plastics, I'm not sure that I would have believed you. And now it's actually quite an emotive word. And there's probably quite a few people watching this who have a really clear, strong viewpoint on plastics as a topic. And so to test that out, we set people the task of submitting 2 words that for them, that come to mind when they think about plastics. And we put that into a cool program. I think it's a cool program. And it's pulled out this word cloud for us, which hopefully everyone can see, of people's intuitive reactions. And so I suppose, there's some indication here of where people are today with plastics. And, actually some of the words that they've used resonate with where many of you started on your own personal journeys.
Seb, did you fill it in? What were your words?
I put waste and reuse in there.
Reuse. I think I had cheap and pollution, and both of them really stand out. A lot of people thinking in a similar way. So perhaps we could start by just looking at the current system of plastic. And Leila, you mentioned the new plastics economy report. And indeed, that is the famous report that brought into public awareness the fact that by 2050, we will have more plastic than fish by weight in the oceans. So why did we in the foundation pick this as a theme, and what's happening in the system of plastics right now?
Yeah, well, maybe, I guess to start that story, linking it back to the word cloud there, and seeing that, there's obviously words like pollution and waste and oceans coming through, and that there's a clear environmental problem with plastics, but also the fact that there's words like convenient and useful and versatile and cheap coming through. And that's almost the dichotomy of plastics, and why they're really interesting is that they are really useful materials. And, even if you just take a quick look around your house, you're wearing plastics, you're sitting on plastics, your computer has plastic materials in it. You'll use plenty of plastic in your fridge for delivering food and keeping it safe. So they serve really important functions in our modern economy and lifestyle, but there is this environmental problem with them when they're not staying in the system and leaking out into our environment. So yeah, I guess coming from that perspective, that's why plastics are interesting to look at. And then plastic packaging is particularly interesting to look at, because there is where you really see, I guess, where the issues of plastics are coming from in terms of very short lifetimes of use for very long lifetimes of impact in the environment. And also about 1/3 of plastics is used in plastic packaging. So yeah, that's why plastic packaging is then interesting to look at and try to think about where the issue is coming from. And once you start to dig into it, you can see it's because it's a very classic linear system where plastic packaging is designed to be, sort of extracted oil, made into a packaging, made into a packaging, used for a very short period of time. And no thought is put into how that's going to stay in the system. So it just becomes waste at end of life. And so to exemplify this, I wanted to show one of the key diagrams that I guess came out in that first new plastics economy report, when we're first thinking, okay, it's an interesting material to look at from the fact that it's probably a classic linear model. And this is exactly what the analysis showed. So here we can see that we produce 78 million tons of plastic packaging a year, but that only 2% of that is actually making it back into the plastic packaging system. The rest of it, so 40% of it, is going straight to landfill. 32% of this is leaking out of collection systems and into the environment. And whilst 14% is collected for recycling, even there, we're not setting up the system to be able to bring the material back into plastic packaging and into a useful form. So yeah, I guess that's why
those numbers will surprise a few people, Leila, because a lot of plastic, of course, people understand to be very recyclable. PET, for example, people are like, well, that's recyclable. I put that in my recycling bin, it gets turned back into more PET. What sort of behind? Why is it so challenging? Maybe people would ask that question.
Yep. And I think that's a good point about it. And it came a little bit to what I was talking about in my journey of the PhD as well, in realizing it's not only a materials problem, it's also a systems problem of what we set up to better keep these materials in place. So there's an aspect of a materials problem in that some of this plastic packaging that's going to landfill is because it's not designed appropriately in the first place. You know, it's a mixture of different materials. It's small format materials that are very hard to collect, and or there's a lack of investment in the ability to collect it. So there's an aspect of a materials problem, but yeah, there's the aspect of the systems problem in that we're producing materials, we're doing some of the front end work, we're not at the same time developing the systems that are required to collect it. And it's also, you know, it was amazing to see the number of different countries we have represented on this call. And so I'm sure everyone's very aware that there's a very different experience in every country in terms of what's actually been set up for infrastructure for collection.
And Leila, when you say it's a systems problem, so the system of plastics as it is right now, could you sketch it for us really briefly? So who are the key players? How does it look like so that the participants get an idea?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the system of plastics looks like what this diagram is, but basically it's also the fact that you don't have a lot of communication along all of the different players that play a role here. So you've got, you know, polymer producers, which sit right at the start. You might then have a packaging producer who decides what types of packaging to put together. You have the designer of that packaging, who's then not necessarily talking to the end of this line where the collection part sits and the sort of education part sits. And in the middle there, you've got someone who produces a product and then just asks for packaging for it without having that integration of how do I produce a product better so that it can you know, have better packaging, or we'll get into this in terms of innovation. How can I actually think about delivering a product differently so it changes packaging requirements? So yeah, I guess we have this current picture because we have fragmentation on each person just designing their little section of the system, but not designing the system as a whole.
We've had a quick clarifying question, and someone's perhaps surprised to see you put incineration as a kind of end of pipe thing, you know, like, you know, it's going to waste. Many people might be coming with the assumption that, oh, if you're burning plastic for energy, that's somehow, you know, returning it to its base form, I guess. So why do we, on our diagram, do we kind of indicate that's like a, or, you know, it's on the same level as being landfilled and leaked into the ocean?
So I guess the first thing to remember, and the most important argument in that aspect, is that most plastics are produced from oil. So they're petroleum derived. So you've maybe given it a very short life as a packaging, but it's basically just directly burning of fossil fuels, which we know in order to meet any of our climate goals and really produce the world that we need to be going towards, we need to actually decouple from fossil fuels and fossil fuel derived energy. So yeah, that's the single most important reason, or the single clearest reason why just incineration of plastics isn't a circular economy concept.
Yeah, take energy,
yes,
turn it into something valuable, and then use some more energy to turn it back into energy.
Yeah, and it's a purely extractive process.
Okay.
So, yes.
So, well, we also, so actually I'm going to share a red pen into the chat now, because we you know, that's quite a bleak picture in some ways, Leila, what you've given us so far. And we obviously, you're going to tell us a bit, that's the bleakest it's going to get in the course of this webinar. We're going to be going a lot more optimistic. And so I've just shared a red pen, which we shared also in advance. Don't worry if you didn't have a chance to contribute in advance, because feel free to plug in your comments as the session runs on. We're going to be going through these questions in different sections, but one of the questions we were keen to understand people's viewpoint on is this sort of question of like, are you optimistic or are you pessimistic? And I'm actually quite pleased to say, Leila, that people are mostly quite optimistic. I mean, that's probably a half full reading of the diagram, perhaps. A real sense that, you know, actually that unrecycled material, someone quoted the 90% of unrecycled materials as an opportunity, a valuable material that's out there, that actually there's a lot of excitement around technology, a different way of doing things, lots of policies there. So yeah, so optimism is rife in our system, and you can see Obviously, for those of you who haven't used a red pen before, you can see you plot yourself somewhere. You can see people doing that now, and you can also reply to people to share your viewpoint.
So when we talk about circular economy here, we always say that circular economy gives a positive vision for the future. And maybe just to reiterate for those who joined the series for the first time, so the way we describe circular economy is based on 3 principles. That is designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. So how would these 3 principles apply for the new economy for plastics? How would it look like?
Yeah, and it is good to see there's some optimism here. And I certainly, I'll show you another slide in a moment. I'm hoping that that will boost optimism after, I'm sorry that it was quite a bleak outlook at the start. But yeah, again, that was the journey I went through, but it was really in seeing this vision of how you apply circular economy principles that gave me the optimism, or the feeling that actually there is a way that we can look at this problem differently. And it's a way of looking at the problem that's not just focusing on, okay, you know, we've got all this poorly designed material going into a system, you know, what do we do with it at the end? And it's really a vision of, from the start, how do we design the materials so that they flow through, and that there's actually a value to the materials at their end of life. So I just want to bring up the second diagram that we had in our New Plastics Economy report. So after we laid out, you know, that sort of classic linear system and how plastic packaging looks currently, we then laid out what a vision for a circular economy for packaging looks like. And this is, as Ilma was saying, based on the 3 principles of the circular economy, but also particularly taking into account designing out waste and pollution from the start, and keeping products and materials in use, and actually ascribing value to packaging, because it's a useful material. We've gone through a lot of sort of processing to make a plastic packaging. Then how do we design it so that it has use after a consumer has finished with it? So yeah, here we can see it's a bit hard to show on the diagram, but elimination also plays a part. So elimination of unnecessary packaging, and also innovation that leads to elimination of packaging while still delivering products and goods to a consumer in a useful and convenient way. We then also look at reuse models. So for packaging, it's actually just changing our mindset a little bit around just delivering a product to a consumer in a single-use packaging, and actually how can you embed reusable models. Actually, hopefully someone can post up a link in the chat to a reuse book that we published last year that lays out all of the different ways that you can look at reuse for packaging, because it's actually a lot broader than you think. And we lay out 4 different models in terms of whether it's a return or a refill model, and an at-home or on-the-go model. And we can dig into that in the innovation section in a little bit more detail. What's really interesting, I guess, here, also still just focusing on that reuse loop, is that we lay out that it's actually a $10 billion opportunity, at least a $10 billion opportunity for businesses to engage in reuse models for packaging. So it's also looking at how we create value in the system in terms of doing things differently and engaging consumers differently and delivering products differently. There's actually an opportunity for business innovation and business development. And then we also, of course, have radically improved, or need radically improved, recycling. And this comes through creating those collection systems, but also creating the drive when materials go into the system in terms of designing them appropriately, using certain types of polymers that have a higher chance of circulating within that system, and also looking at things like the dyes and inks and additives and labels that we put on. And that's, as I was sort of saying, bringing you know, all players of the system together, so that the designer is also thinking about what happens at the end of life of a material. And yeah, so over time, this sort of diagram has crystallized into a 6-point vision that we follow within the New Plastics Economy Initiative, and that Garance will then be picking up on how we support this and promote this vision. But really, it's first around eliminating sort of unnecessary packaging or products and packaging that we don't need. Then looking at embedding reuse models where possible. Then, as I was saying, looking at making sure that you actually design packaging to be 100% recyclable, reusable, or compostable from the outset. And then also making sure that there's the drivers for the packaging to be recycled, reused, or composted in practice. So it's not good enough to just put a material on the market without also making sure that you're creating the drivers at the end of life for collection for use of recycled content. And yeah, then there's a piece around decoupling from fossil fuel inputs. And so here we see renewably sourced virgin feedstock, but primarily you try and decouple from petroleum inputs by also using recycled content. So, and that's across the circular economy by, you know, recycling, reusing, refurbishing. You can immediately reduce reliance on fossil fuel inputs just by using the material that's already there. And the final point is around designing out hazardous materials, and also, again, that we've got a lot of different people from across the world, so respecting the health and rights of all workers involved in this system, because in some countries the informal workforce plays a really big role in making this system work. But yeah, so I think for me this represents a really positive and actionable vision that we can work towards.
And obviously we see recycling is, you know, has a significant role to play, and we're going to talk a lot more about the innovation agenda later. We have had a couple of questions specifically because recycling still plays a role in the vision diagram. There's been a few questions about the notion of cascaded recycling that was on our previous diagram. How do we go from 14% collected to 2% closed loop recycling? What do we kind of mean by that?
Yeah, so it's so the closed loop recycling is something like collecting a PET bottle and being able to make another PET bottle from it. Quite often what happens at the moment is lots of different types of polymers are collected together, and we don't necessarily have the means to separate them all out, or they're in films, or they've got lots of colorants in them. And so that's when you produce a park bench or something like that from them. So you take all the different polymers, you add something called a compatibilizer, and you produce just a solid plastic object to be used, normally in an application that can't then itself be recycled. So at the moment, a lot of our recycling is that sort of cascaded or downcycling, where we don't use the material for the same value or purpose that it was intended for. And increasing that 2% is around that design piece, and also having sort of separate collections. So something like a bottle deposit system works really well for getting clean PET streams, like material collection, which we can then use to make a bottle again. Yeah, so we need more in that recycling loop, but we need to be pushing more around that high value recycling versus downcycling.
Just because it's been collected for recycling doesn't mean it's turned back into the same quality material again.
Yeah.
So this positive and actionable vision that you mentioned, and the 6 parts of this vision, and before that, when I asked you about the system and the key players in the system, so how much has the plastic system as such contributed to the creation of this vision?
Is this where we want to bring Garance in, actually?
Is this the right?
Yeah. So
the right segue to the
yeah, I'll hand over to Garance. So because actually exactly this vision, we haven't just created it, we've consulted with many companies, organizations across the value chain. That's really, really important. And I'll hand over to Garance because she's actually going to talk about how we work across that value chain.
Yeah, thanks Lila, and thanks Ilma. So yeah, Lila just took us through the new plastics economy vision, but actually if we now think about how we want to move towards that vision, it will require a full system shift. And for that to happen, we definitely need unprecedented levels of collaboration and of collective action. And this collaboration needs to be cross-value chain, so involving plastic producers, manufacturers, retailers, and brands. And the New Plastics Economy Initiative has actually 3 main areas of focus, which are, in a sense, our vehicles to accelerate the transition to a circular economy for plastics. I think it might be useful if I just take you through the 3 areas of focus just very briefly. The first one is the global commitment, and it was launched with UN Environment in October 2018. Today, we now have over 450 organizations from around the world who signed the global commitment, collectively representing more than 20% of the global plastics packaging value chain, which is quite massive. And out of the 450 organizations, over 150 are businesses that have made concrete commitments. And sorry, I thought I was out of the webinar for a moment. So out of the 450 organizations, over 150 are businesses that have made concrete commitments and have set clearly defined and ambitious targets by 2025. And these targets, it's really important, are underpinned by common definitions of the key concepts. So basically, we all agree on what recyclable means, on what compostable means. And this alignment behind the definitions, it's absolutely crucial to make sure we're going in the same direction. So
can I pick up on that, Garance? Because that's
yeah.
a very common challenge or question that comes up, because, you know, like in many ways, biodegradable, bioplastics sometimes get viewed as a bit of a silver bullet, or people just simply don't know what all those terms actually mean, or, you know, what do you do with a piece of packaging that's allegedly compostable? That sounds like a really important piece of the work that you're doing by bringing all these organizations together to say, well, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so for instance, the global commitment team put out we actually wondered, like, what does recyclable actually mean? And the definition we actually agreed on is to say that recyclable does not just mean to be theoretically recyclable. So it just cannot work only in a lab. And we need to prove that if something is recyclable, then it should be recyclable in practice and at scale, meaning that it should be proven that there is an existing collecting, sorting, and recycling system in place that recycles the packaging, and that it's not just a theoretical possibility. So basically, this is the kind of thing, the kind of work we've been doing in the New Plastics Economy team, just agreeing on definitions and sharing them with the stakeholders we're working with. So now we have this vision and all those common definitions and common understanding of what progress means, and we're able to go towards that vision that we've talked about.
And they have to
yeah.
declare their commitments, right? And then we track and report their progress towards that. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And what's really interesting is that we're starting to see promising progress already being made. So the first global commitment report was launched in October 2019. And there are a couple of interesting highlights that I would like to share with you. But I guess that if you want to know more, there are so many things happening. So just go and check the progress report on the website. The first interesting thing is that we saw that now over a third of relevant signatories have active reuse pilots, meaning that they are more and more moving from single-use plastics to reuse plastics. And by reuse, so Lila just explained it earlier, but I mean plastic packaging that is refilled and reused for the same application. Another really interesting highlight, for instance, is that on the design side, so companies who signed the global commitments have committed to have 100% of their plastics packaging to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable. And already today, we see that approximately 60% of the signatories' plastics packaging is reusable, recyclable, or compostable in practice and at scale today. So just as I explained to you earlier. But
how do we monitor and track the progress? There was actually a question about that. Is it self-declared?
So I think Juliette might be in a better position to give you some details about how it's exactly monitored and tracked. I don't know if Juliette, you want to take this question?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Lina?
So how is the progress of the companies monitored and tracked? Do they self-declare their progress, or is there some sort of analysis?
Yes, so basically, actually, we just launched last week the reporting. So sending a questionnaire based on the themes of reuse, elimination, recyclability, also to companies, to hundreds of companies then, and they have until, I think, beginning of August to report on. And then based on that, we will analyze the data and then publish another progress report. for 2020.
Great, thank you. Garance?
So yes, I mean that's the story for businesses, Garance. I mean, what did you have a couple more highlights you wanted to give us, or were we ready to channel on, push on?
Yeah, I think that's it for the
Yes.
global commitment, but I definitely encourage you to go and check the progress report that was published last year.
Right.
So yeah, so that's obviously the story for businesses, but what about local, you know, how does that play out? Leila mentioned all the different systems that we have around the world. How does that kind of play out geographically, globally? What role do other institutions, other than, although I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but I already know the answer to the question I'm going to ask you. The global commitment isn't just for businesses, of course.
Yeah, and the global commitment is also supported by governments and some NGOs such as WWF, National Geographic. I guess you can find the whole list on the website. But yeah, that's a very interesting point, Seth. And well, we know that the plastics challenge is a global challenge. It's absolutely crucial to have common vision, but the way we actually get there and the actual solutions on the ground will definitely be different in Chile or in France or in South Africa. In Chile, for instance, recycling infrastructure is not as developed as it is, for instance, in France or in Europe in general. There is an important informal waste sector, meaning that there are some waste pickers that pick waste and bring it to recycling plants. And because Chile doesn't have as much as the existing recycling infrastructure, they also have the opportunity to be a lot more innovative than we do, actually. So to look directly upstream and go towards reuse, for instance. So we definitely see the need for on-the-ground solutions, which are tailored for local contexts. And this is why, alongside the global level action, we have a network of national and regional initiatives called Plastic Pact Network. So basically, how does it work? Every pact across the world is led by a local independent partner organization, and it is a national platform for local stakeholders, so including businesses, governments, and NGOs, to work together towards a circular economy for plastics in a local context. So today, there are 7 launched plastics pacts all across the world. So UK, Chile, South Africa, Portugal, a European Plastics Pact, and a couple of more. But we are also developing a lot more at the moment. So if you're interested, look out for coming launches in the next months. And towards the end of 2020, there will be a lot more plastics pacts being launched.
So looking at this map and given how global our audience is, why would you say that right now the concentration is mainly on Europe and we have only 2 other spots outside of Europe in Chile and South Africa?
Yeah, I would say that in the past few years, we've concentrated our development of pacts in Europe just because, like, for very simple reasons. We're based in the UK as the foundation. We have a big network of contacts also across Europe, but we're definitely looking to work more with countries, especially in South Africa and also in North America. And obviously also in Africa, we're exploring a lot of opportunities and possibilities out there. So yeah, it's definitely on our radar for the next months and the next years to just expand our Plastics Pact network outside of Europe.
So we've heard a bit about the problem, the challenge that we face with plastics. We've heard a bit about the vision. We've seen, I guess we've seen the problem and seen the vision. Thanks to Garance for sharing a bit about the actual, some of the core focus areas of the plastics team's work in terms of how we collaborate with stakeholders. Now we're into the really exciting piece, because what we've sort of talked about quite a lot is just how big of a challenge it is, or how significant. You know, I'm not sure that anyone's really tried to shift a system at this scale before. It's almost like a new form, and in many ways we're kind of prodding, but at the heart of it is innovation, or the sense of like we need to deliberately disrupt a whole system like this to create, or to make that move from the first diagram you showed us, Leila, to the second diagram. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that agenda?
Yeah, I really like that wording, actually, deliberately disrupt. And that's why I find the innovation so exciting, because it's taking that conscious decision to innovate towards a better system. And I think innovation is really important because it's also you know, we're not just trying to say, stop doing what you're doing and go back to the old days. We're also not, we're not going to get there if we just make small tweaks, you know, and small improvements to maybe one item of how we currently design packaging. As you're saying, to shift on this level, we're going to need to think quite broad and actually innovate on how we deliver a product to a user, and really think about what are we trying to achieve with packaging. And it is delivering a product or an experience and value to a user. It's not actually delivering packaging to a user. And that's why the innovation piece comes in. And I'm going to show you how we're currently sort of thinking about approaching innovation, and really, we call this the upstream innovation mindset at the moment. It's actually a bit of a sneak peek into some new work we're working on at the moment. So this isn't published yet, but it's, as I was saying, it's around that piece of that we're not just rethinking the packaging. If you just sit in a rethinking packaging mindset, then your sort of options for innovation are quite limited, and you're only going to slightly iterate and, you know, slightly improve on the system that we have currently. Whereas if you want to create a system that works, it's actually about rethinking the packaging, the product, and the system. And this opens up a whole suite of innovation and business opportunities, as I was saying, to continue delivering a product and value to a user in a new way that actually eliminates waste by design, rather than just eliminating the waste at the end of life.
And it really connects to what we heard during the circular design webinar with Joe Wiles, and he was talking about one of the circular design approaches or mindsets, which is all about zooming in on the needs of the user and then zooming out and looking at the system. And it looks like this is exactly the approach that you've been using.
Yes, I think so. Exactly, because it's going, what are the needs of the user and what are the functions of packaging? And we're still trying to deliver that in terms of convenience and efficiency and affordability. But do you have to do it in the way that you've always done it? Or can you actually go, what am I trying to deliver, and then rethink how you achieve that? So I think that's exactly. And I think then the interesting or the exciting thing is that even within each of these sections, you know, even if you are looking at the packaging, well, it's not only about making a packaging slightly smaller, or can you completely rethink the concept and think about something that's edible or dissolvable. When you're thinking about a product, you know, actually, I was about to give an example that'll give away some, one of the challenges I asked later, so I'll keep that. But you could think about formulation, you know, does the product need to be delivered in the form that you currently deliver it? And then same in something like rethink the system. You know, if you're looking at something like packaging, transport packaging, can you actually eliminate or change those requirements by simply looking at localized production? And that's a completely different way of looking at the problem that eliminates the need for packaging, not by changing the packaging, but by changing the system and innovating in where that product is coming from. So yes, I find this really exciting because there's actually now a really broad range of solutions. And as I was saying, to me, it's then, you know, it's exciting. If you're a business, there's a lot of opportunities to think how you do something differently rather than just trying to improve something that you know is a problem.
So maybe this is a good time to look at one of the challenges that you set up during the red pen exercise. And we asked our participants to look into the beverage system and shampoo bottle, or the beverage bottle and shampoo bottle, and come up with potential alternatives. But before we look at the answers, do you have any great examples to share, let's say for the shampoo, and how shampoo could be rethought as a product regarding its packaging?
Yeah, so I do have some good examples, and I'm also then interested, I purposely didn't look too much through sort of what was submitted on Red Pen, because I'd love for you to then give me some of those ideas and we can see how they fit in with what we've been seeing.
To be honest, the Red Pen was a slightly surreptitious way for me to get ideas for my next startup that I'm looking to find. So thank you so much for submitting to my sort of brainstorm, being tricked into brainstorming products for me.
These might end up in our next innovation book. So yeah, here I've got a few different examples that probably exemplify those different aspects of that upstream innovation mindset, so that design mindset that I put up. So in the background here, we're seeing something like, or the business Lush, which probably many people are familiar with because they've managed to make a global business out of rethinking the product of shampoo. So at the moment, you know, most of us think of a liquid when we're thinking about shampoo, and we've probably also been taught and conditioned that that's what we want. And Lush has rethought that and actually eliminated the need for packaging or packaging that contains a product by just making a product that contains itself, so it's solid. And as I was saying, this has become a global business, and we're seeing a lot of other businesses and some of the you know, big brand names starting to take on this concept as well. Up in the right hand corner, we've got something called Nobo Drops. And so they're actually a startup from the US that has just gotten quite a lot of funding. And I don't remember the man's exact age that started it up, but he's about 16 or 18. And yeah, so this uses a dissolvable polymer, and they've basically managed to formulate it so that you have sort of a concentrated liquid inside, a dissolvable polymer. And again, you either use it for the house, or I can really see this being used somewhere like hotels or where you want to provide single servings, but eliminates the need for that single serve packaging. And yeah, down on the left-hand side here, we've got, again, this is a concept by a German designer. It's called Soap Bottle, but basically she's redesigned the bottle so the packaging itself is a soap bar. Inside it, you have the shampoo. The idea is you use the shampoo and you then use the soap bar as soap. So yeah, rethinking the packaging, but in quite a lateral thinking way of going, well, how can we use a different material for a packaging that then serves its own function?
So if you put it under the water, you can use the bottle as a soap?
Yes. Yep. So the bottle itself is a soap,
Okay.
and then
I haven't heard that one.
the liquid product.
Right.
And yeah, then we also have, I wanted to come on to some reuse models. So these are both examples that are found in that reuse book that we published last year. As I said, there's a lot of examples in there, but I've just pulled out two here around refill models. So the one on the right is actually Hair Refillery, which was run by Unilever. So they were experimenting in the Philippines with actually providing a place where you could either bring back your own bottle, or you brought a bottle and returned it, and providing then the shampoo in bulk. But I think, yeah, what's interesting here is it's a company like Unilever exploring a refill model, and I think they got quite positive responses for it.
Right, shall we then have a look at what responses we have got on the red pen exercise?
I have to say, Leila, I really enjoyed your expression that we've been conditioned to think of shampoo as a liquid. Yeah, I feel like that's happened to me. So I'm pleased that you're here to admire. So we have been asking people to brainstorm this in the red pen. Looks like Ilma's going to share that out. Some themes that came up under the soft drink example were, could the packaging be refill, which I guess comes back to one of the examples that you came up with, Leila. What about glass? Lots of people saying, why can't we just go back to glass? That seems like an interesting angle, like thinking about old glass bottle refill systems, perhaps.
Yes, I think glass is an interesting material, and this is where it does come to the fact that plastic has benefits, and one of those benefits is actually it's lightweight. So when you think about glass, you know, you're looking at probably 10 times the weight in a glass bottle, and that's actually just I hadn't thought about this until I started getting into this area, but that's just a lot of weight that you're transporting around. So you certainly don't want to be air freighting something that's in glass. So in terms of moving to single-use glass, doesn't make sense. But if you're coupling that with a reuse system and/or someone owning that bottle and then refilling themselves, then that's where you can be more material agnostic in whether it's glass or plastic or metal. And it's actually because you use the material many times, it doesn't have, you don't have to worry about the impacts in terms of transport and carbon impacts of production. So yeah, so I'd say glass, yes, if you're coupling that with a reuse refill system.
And what about biodegradable packaging? That was another trend that we saw. Could it be a viable solution?
Biodegradable, and compostable packaging is an interesting one, because I guess the first point to make is that all of these materials still need a system for them to exist within. So it's the same as, you know, just a regular PET non-biodegradable problem is a problem if it just ends up in the environment and wasn't captured in a system. It's actually the same for a compostable or biodegradable material. Many of them don't break down particularly fast in the environment. We don't know what their impacts are. So you actually still need to be designing it to be collected. It's just that it goes into a biological system rather than the technical system for recycling.
So let's continue the session without Leela for a moment. I had a quick question, loads of great questions in the chat and Q&A. We will try and answer more of those in moving forward. I mean, like, one of the things that's interesting about the different business models that get highlighted by many of the people suggesting them in the red pen. By the way, Leela, I think we've got you back. Great to have you back. We lost you there for a second.
Yes.
But we've had a few questions in about the role of consumers. It's a question we ask it all the time. You know, what's the role? What's the importance of behavior change? You know, how does that play? Where does that sit in this sort of vision or story that you've been telling?
Sorry, I am properly back now, I think. So if you can just repeat that.
So I was asking about the role of behavior change in consumers.
Yep. And so related to compostables or just in general?
Well, I guess, yeah, but I mean, we've been about all the different kinds of innovation and the vision that we've been talking about.
Yep. So again, so for me, the really interesting thing with behavior change with consumers, I, again, became much more positive when I realized that it was a systems problem and that we could address it on a systems level, and that was engaging business and governments. Because I actually get a little bit, I'm going to use the word depressed, but when I think that it's just a consumer problem, because there's no way we're going to change the individual behavior of every single consumer. But there is then an aspect, so there's an aspect of governments and businesses needing to provide, you know, the right materials, needing to provide the sorts of systems that will actually work. And then there's a piece in consumers being open to engaging with that. So let's say we're looking at a reuse system, a refill system, you know, it's the businesses, I would say, obligation to set up those sorts of systems and provide them to us. And as an individual, you can then feel empowered by engaging and supporting those sorts of systems. So yeah, so that's how I see it. It's not our job to try and deal with unrecyclable packaging that's coming into our households, but then we can play a role in terms of engaging and supporting the right types of innovations that we want to see. And I would also say, so let's say somewhere like Waitrose, they recently opened or trialed a store in the UK where it was completely unpackaged, so everything was refill models. And this was a really nice, I guess, example of this, because they made that whole store change. So they provided the right system, but they then invested a lot of time and effort in making sure that consumers that came into the store knew how to engage with it and use it. And that coupled together is what made a really successful pilot that they're going to be rolling out to other stores.
And one more question, and perhaps this will be the last question in the session as we're approaching the last 5 or 6 minutes. So there are obviously a lot of questions in terms of how are things going to be after the COVID-19 situation. And given that, in a way, we can start seeing the trend of some users reversing back to single-use plastic, is there a way that innovation could play a role in making sure that we don't go backwards?
Yes, I absolutely think so. And it comes to the point I was making around, you know, really thinking about what are you trying to achieve and what are the functions of packaging. And so it's then recognizing that, you know, during the current crisis and in the world going forward, hygiene is definitely going to play a key role. And that's part of where this sentiment of moving back towards single use is coming from. And it's then actually also switching that mindset of going, it's not single use that we're trying to achieve, it's hygiene that we're trying to achieve. And innovation can allow us to achieve that in different ways. So we actually have a company, Alcaramo, operating in Chile, which is a nice example here because they've actually developed systems that are like completely automated refill systems. So you bring your own bottle, you actually just put it in the machine and it recognizes the bottle and then dispenses the material. And actually the only thing you've touched is your bottle in that interaction, and it was a refill model. They also offer a service where they've taken you know, rather than having to go into a big store to refill or to buy products, they've actually created little mobile units that move around to allow refills within neighborhoods. So yeah, again, that's another interesting thing that actually fits quite well with perhaps the new sort of world that we're moving towards. And both of those still really offer the hygiene and the safety aspect, but bring in an innovation aspect to achieve it in a new way that still doesn't only rely on single use.
Right. Well, thank you very much. It's been brilliant to have three of you here on the webinar with us. So if there were three things you wanted our participants to take away from this session, what would that be? And Lila, maybe I can start with you.
Maybe one each.
Oh, one each. That's even better. Great. One takeaway.
Yeah. For me, and as I say, the key takeaway is that it's a systems problem and that there is then a systems solution. And that's actually a really positive and uplifting versus thinking that you need to change every single individual consumer's habit and that it's all down to even you changing all your habits, but it's actually supporting, that systems shift and the engagement of all the different actors that need to play a role in that. And I actually find that a positive story. Well, and given the fact that we know all of these stakeholders are engaging. So yeah, that's what makes me feel good about it.
Great. Thank you. Garance, briefly, really briefly.
Yeah, I would say that it's not about the fact that plastics is a bad material, but it's actually about the system that plastics are into. And to solve the problem, we, as Lila just said, we need to have this system perspective.
And Juliette?
Yeah, I mean, of course, plastic has many issues, and I think, yeah, it's just crazy. Like, it's easy to be pessimistic, I guess, but there are so many opportunities that business can play, and also individuals. So yeah, so be excited about that, because there are a lot of business opportunities and a lot of place also for us to make a change. So yeah.
Great. Thank you, our three brilliant speakers. And very quickly, just before we close this webinar, a few things you need to remember. So head to the Slack community, and this is where you will find the recording of this call, of this webinar. And we will also be posting answers to the questions, as we had so many questions and we had just no capacity to or ability to answer them all. So we'll try to pick up as many of them offline. We will post homework. There's nothing really big in terms of homework. We just want you to go back to your learning trios and have some reflection on this and the next webinar of this week, which will be about cities. And is there anything else, Seb?
I think that, you know, with the homework, it's about reflecting on each session. There's multiple things going on. Think about how those topics relate. There's obviously information about if you're not in a trio as well, there's still time to form one. There's still time to form a pair, or just post in the channels, and you'll quickly find yourself inundated with other people who want to share your views. So reflect on this week's session, discuss it with others, and especially try and find people who maybe have attended a different one than you, so you can kind of share your understandings across those two sessions and practice describing what's been shared.
Yes, and we'll share the slides and the homework in week 5 plastics Slack channel. And we'll see you in the next webinar, which is on Friday at 4 p.m. GMT+1, and it will be about policymaking and cities. So we'll see you there. Thank you and goodbye.